when I looked at the snow, the epiphany I had was I'm meant to be here for something. And that this universe is not running the way I've been told.
Welcome back to the AudioLife podcast, where we tell your story in your voice. I'm your host again today, Carrie Purcell, and today I'm joined by Kris Land. Now, Kris is an award-winning author. He is what he would refer to as a conscious entrepreneur, and he's also a teacher who has spent more than 4 decades mastering and simplifying complex systems. And this part is pretty interesting. Now, Kris and I just met, but I can attest to the fact that he is a teacher that can simplify complex concepts based on our conversations already. But one way that you might see this is in his publications, his writing history. So Kris's latest book is called The Infinity Within, and we're going to talk about it today. It is a powerful spiritual awakening. But when I say Kris is a teacher simplifying complex systems, he's also published a book on finance, actually the finance book for young adults, which has a huge need in the market, and it's the book that he wanted when he was a young adult. He's written a book about how to build your dream home, simplifying the world of construction for just regular homeowners. He's also even authored a children's book. So super interesting background across every field. His work has been guided by a single mission, which is to equip people with the clarity, confidence, and tools to reclaim agency over their lives and live with intention, which is very cool and very powerful. Today, we're going to learn all about Kris's journey from building his home to the 30 years that it took to eventually write his latest and most personal and most profound book, The Infinity Within. We will also cover things like Kris is a veteran CEO, he's a serial entrepreneur, he's a husband, and he's a father. So we'll cover that too, and I expect some of the lessons that we learned along the way. Kris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carrie. Very much appreciate being here. Thank you.
I'm so happy to chat with you today. Again, even just looking at your books, it's such an interesting history. You know, we chatted a little bit when we logged in. Tell me where you're based today.
Well, I'm in Central Texas.
Central Texas. Good. Okay. So I often like to go way back, like just, we know a little bit of the context today. We know some of the conversations that we're going to have. I like to kind of go way back, get to know you a little bit better. And I often ask people to start by telling me where you were born and if there's a story behind your name.
My dad was both a rancher and wildcatter. And so we moved back and forth between Bismarck, North Dakota and Golden, Colorado. But a lot of my time was spent in Bismarck. And growing up, I would be, well, probably still am, but I was considered a computer geek. So I was very introverted and did not get along well with my peers. Not that I didn't like them, I just didn't have things to talk about. So when I was in junior high, I started selling Apple II computers. That'll age me a bit. And one of the customers was a third generational farmer on a very large farm and wanted to do accounting software. So I knew how to program and he knew what accounting looked like. So we created a little company and we did that. And then at the age of 17, sold that for a whole bunch of money. And then about 6 months later, I fell into a deep depression. And, this goes along the story of where many people have probably heard of how people that win the lottery destroy their lives. I at least have a viewpoint on how that happens. And for me, what it was is I'd blown every goal I thought I was supposed to do, I had accomplished by the age of 17. And it left me with, now what? And so from there, I kind of clawed my way out by creating 3 goals that I will never be able to fully accomplish, but I can do daily. And then from there, I moved to San Diego and I got hired by a bank. My boss's name was Kris, coincidentally. And he, in one of our discussions, don't remember how it came up, but he basically said, I'm an atheist. And I said, okay. And even though I have zero problem with people believing whatever they want to believe, for me, it didn't sit right for him. So I kind of spent some time thinking about that and kind of from a science point of view, seeing if anything could be proven. And what I found was you can't easily guarantee we have a soul or we don't. But what I did find is there's 4 questions you can ask that show all the upside is in believing we have a soul, and all the downside is in believing we don't, regardless of whether we do or don't. But then that left me with another question, which is, okay, we have a soul. What is it? What's it doing here? What's the purpose? And so I started going through questions and answers and pieces and basically started with the construct of what has now become the infinity within. Originally, it was going to be called the soul path, and came up with this whole construct over about a year and a half. And so by the age of 19 going into 20, I hired a ghostwriter because I was not an author at the time, and I wanted to write the book. But the ghostwriter, she kept wanting to make it her own book. So I fired the ghostwriter and took all my notes and put them in a filing cabinet. And this was 40 plus years ago. But what it did do is this construct, these concepts, these ideas have lived with me since and have basically been kind of the North Star for me moving through life. And since then, I've founded 11 other companies. I've worked with some very large Fortune 100 companies, and I've done all kinds of things in the technology space, which is where I really love playing. And then I met my wife in San Diego. We ended up with 3 boys. We moved to Texas because she's from there. And she had some difficulties growing up, and so she would always ask me questions about how I looked at life and why I tended to be fairly optimistic. And I would share these construct ideas. And at the beginning of 25, she said, look, your ideas and concepts have helped me so much. You need to finish this book. So I took my notes out of the filing cabinet, and for about 3 solid months, did nothing but work on getting the book done, and then published it in mid-year. And then since then, it's done extremely well. And the biggest thing which is why I'm really wanting to share the story, is the interview or the reviews I'm getting are saying what I hope they would say, which is, it's not a preachy book. It's not a book telling you what to believe or how to believe. It's a book that kind of feels like a mirror as you're reading this fictional character, Gabriel, and I intentionally chose the archangel's name, this particular one. He goes by Gabe, and he goes through kind of his life story, which is in a lot of ways a non-fictional memoir of my story. And then he meets his mentor, Elias, and kind of remembers who and what each one of us is and what we're capable of doing. And so that brings us to today.
Thank you for that overview. I have lots of little questions I'm going to bring us back to. So you've given us the snapshot of what the book is. Who is the book for?
It's for people who are curious about why we're here, who may feel lost or feel incongruent or feel squished or small, who have been told that we're not connected beings, that we're just here and that we don't matter. There's just so many different things that we're taught. And some of them are even taught in an innocuous way, like for our benefit. And I'll take just a side channel on what I mean by that. How many times have you ever heard of children being able to see ghosts?
Yeah, lots.
Okay. I happen to have out-of-body experiences starting when I was 6. If you have out-of-body experience or you see ghosts and you run to your parents, what's the first thing they do?
Probably try to calm you down or maybe tell you it didn't happen.
Make believe, you ate the wrong food, you had a nightmare, all these things, right? And they don't do this to be mean or to squash us. It's what they were taught. And they're doing it actually, they think it's making us feel calm by saying these ghosts or these things really didn't happen, it's just imagined, and so you can let it go. Really, I hate to say it this way, but it's a form of gaslighting, right? Because as children, we may actually have seen these things and we're being told no. Well, life And society is built around these beliefs that what's real is maybe not real. And what's actually going on is behind the illusionary curtain of what we're told is going on. And so the book is really a way of asking questions as you read it to yourself about maybe what's really going on and what we really are, and that we might actually be co-creators in what's going on.
Super interesting. Okay, as I said, I have lots of questions. I don't know if I'm opening a whole can of worms too early. When you say what's real maybe isn't really what's going on, can you give us that sort of simple example of what you mean?
Simple example.
I should stop using the word simple.
Okay. I'll use the simplest form I think I can. How often have you either heard or have happened to you where a random person will come up and just talk to you about something? You've never met them, talk to you about their life story, you'll have a conversation, and they'll walk away and you'll never see them again.
Not very often.
Okay. So for me growing up, from the time I started going to coffee stores and restaurants on my own, I'd be sitting there reading my book, happily minding my own business, and random people will literally pull a chair out, not ask, pull a chair out, sit down, have a whole conversation with me about their life. Things that you don't tell strangers. We'll have a conversation, they'll get up and they'll walk away and I'll never see them again. And this happens all the time. In fact, literally last weekend, my family and I went for breakfast. My wife went to take one of the boys to the bathroom, and this older farmer guy comes up and says, I just want to tell you some things, out of the blue.
Is it you, or is it where you live? Is it you and not
Well,
me?
no, this has happened all over the country. In fact, all over the world. So I've lived in Milan, I've lived in Paris. I've lived all over the planet, and it doesn't matter where I am. What I found was, initially it was like, this is really odd. But then we have these things. One of the things, kind of like the ghost story idea, is we have this thing called coincidences. And everybody kind of labels these odd things that happen daily as coincidences. What I say is there is no such things as coincidence. Now, why do I say that? When I really took the time to analyze each and every single one of these discussions I've had with these people, what I found is a common thread that they needed to hear something I had to say, and I needed to hear something they had to say. Well, now, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I think that, quite frankly, we are all co-creators in this game. We're all actually connected through our souls. And that inside what I call the game of Earth, when we need something, we make those requests, and somebody else that fits those requests, that needs something we have, we actually meet, very much like what we're doing right now, and we have a conversation, which is why the book's original name was going to be called The Soul Path, or Your Soul Path, which is as you go through your soul path, right? This concept of soulmates. Well, what I found is there's 5-minute soulmates, 1-week soulmates, monthly soulmates, yearly soulmates, lifetime soulmates, and multiple lifetime soulmates. And so for a very short period of time, somebody needs to link up at that soul level, have a discussion, conversation, or interaction that is much more than just the words. That meets whatever requirement was wanted by the request, and off we go. So that's the shortest answer I can give you.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. I don't know if this is a fair question, but I'm going to try to ask this one anyway, because you've talked about where the book started in your mind at 19 or 20, what it was called at the time. How much has that book at 19 or 20 changed from the book that you wrote decades later?
Almost none.
Interesting.
Almost none. The only thing at age 17, 18, 19, 20, and the fact that it sold my first company, had been doing fairly well and really was enjoying stuff after I got out of the depression. I didn't really analyze some of the other lifetime arcs that might be going on. I spent a lot of time growing up studying different theologies, going all the way back to Egyptians, going back to Sanskrit, the Gnostics, of course, the Bible, Buddhism. I mean, a bunch. And one of the things that became much more apparent is the concept of the archons. So in the Gnostic beliefs, the archons are these gods of reality that actually created the game of Earth that I call it. I have a name based on the game of Earth, that they created this construct we're in. Now, the Gnostics take it to a pretty far-reaching evil direction. If you go through their belief system, the archons, the gods of reality, actually created this reality as a trap to trap souls. And then by eliciting and moving negative emotions and thoughts, fed on the negative emotions and thoughts. Now, I can't prove whether these evil beings existing. However, in The Infinity Within, I discuss them in a little softer way, and that is, if we're soul beings, we're probably pretty smart, and hopefully we weren't not smart enough to enter into a game where we'd be trapped. So maybe as co-creators of this game, we added the concept or idea of the archons as part of the game's rules in order to make the game more challenging, interesting, and hard, versus they actually are imprisoners of our souls in this construct. So I can't prove one or the other. I have a softer way of looking at it that fits fairly well. However, one could argue that the other version might exist as well.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so that brings us back to where you kind of open the story. So 17, you sold a company, you had accomplished far more than you had imagined. That was a problem because what was left to do? It left you with that question of now what? It left you feeling, I won't put feelings behind you, but it put you into depression. It left you feeling like you didn't know how to move forward. There were a few things you mentioned there. So one was that the now what answer was setting out these three, what sounded like, I won't say unachievable goals, but these three goals that you can't achieve at once, but that every single day you'll come back to.
After kind of looking at things and really figuring out that I was left with the now what and what am I going to do next, right? I came up with three goals. Have fun, learn, and do neither the harm or impedance of others. And with those three goals, I could really work at having fun each day, really learning and being curious each day. Again, not doing either the harm or impedance of others, which is kind of like a safety gate, because in my way of looking at things, I don't want to learn or have fun at the expense of others. And so with those three goals, I'll never fully learn everything there is to learn. I'll never fully have all the fun there is to have. And I just have to be careful about not impeding or harming others, right? And so that gave me kind of this foundation to work from and springboard from.
Very interesting. How did you come up with what searching led you to those three goals?
I don't know. I think I just started looking at, okay, what's the simplest, kind of like scientific method, right? What's the simplest boiled down thing I can come up with that I can do, accomplish, and never fully achieve?
Yeah. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay. Now, I want to just mention these two. I want to ask about them because you mentioned as a child you were quite introverted. Would you still describe yourself that way?
No. I think it was in my later 20s where I actually started to be more confident and open as to what I was and what I was doing. It was, I guess the easy answer is after I finished really fleshing out the construct and what the Infinity Within became, it gave me a very different way of looking at how life operates and how all the really weird things that happened to me as a child really made sense. Because I think part of the introversion was just, I didn't fit in because I had some things happen to me. Shoot, I had out of body starting at 6. I had a near-death experience that easily could have been a death experience when I was 15. I had some very, very strange thing, well, quote unquote, strange things happened to me that after retrospect, again, are probably what is more real than what we're told is really going on.
Yeah. Okay. You're looking for purpose, right? Then now what is leading you to how do I continue to find purpose every day? You're also looking for answers, explanations for why you've experienced things that people are saying, no, that didn't happen. That wasn't what you think it was. You've talked about studying all kinds of theologies, which, can hold a lot of answers, can be part of the search for answers. What kind of religion or philosophy existed in your family, your community growing up?
Yeah, my parents were United Methodist. And I had friends in all different sectors. And what I found was, and this is just a personal experience, everybody experiences it differently, but for me, what I found was that the semantics are all different. But when you boil it down, they're all pretty much the same.
Yeah, there's like a core truth. There's something there that is central to all of them. Yeah. So did religion in your family life make sense to you? Did it answer questions? Was there not enough of it, too much of it?
I think it was just there for me. I think that the easy answer is I was very driven by curiosity and digging into questions and answers. So what my family being United Methodist, it was just another piece to the puzzle. It was not an answer. It was more questions. And then as I went through life experiences and eventually started putting down the construct for the book, it laid the foundation apart. If you have a bunch of puzzle pieces, that was one puzzle piece to the whole picture. What my folks believed in and what I went to as a child was not the end all, but it was certainly one of the pieces to the puzzle.
That's fair. So we're 17, 18, 19. We've come up with these 3 daily goals. You've, brought yourself back out of a depression. You've gotten a job. You've met a manager who happens to also have your name, but also tells you that he is an atheist, which again, you still got questions. You got curiosity about it. You go and explore that. You said you came up with 4 questions that sort of guided whether or not we believe we have a soul or we don't believe that. These 4 questions guide the idea that life will be better, be more optimistic, be more positive if we do have a soul, right?
I mean, you're right on. You got it pretty much exact, except I just change it slightly, and that is having soul doesn't guarantee we're going to have an optimal outcome. What the 4 questions show is that all the benefit is in believing we have a soul. So it's just a slight twist, that's all.
So it shows that there's a benefit in believing we have a soul. We're not necessarily, at least my conversation with you, we're still exploring the conversation. We're not here to prove or tell somebody what they should or shouldn't think. The 4 questions, can we talk about those?
Oh, how about if I ask them to you?
Uh-oh. I have so many more questions. All right. Yes, go for it.
We'll start at the base. And you kind of have to put yourself in that place, in each of the places that I'm going to ask you, and then answer the question from that place. All right. So the starting place is you're a piece of clay, meaning you have no soul. Well, I understand it's not a fun place to be, but just play with it. So play with the idea you have no soul, you're a piece of clay, and you believe you have no soul. How does that feel?
I am trying to stay very much in that world. I feel like I'm embodying it, but of course I'm bringing in reflections of the rest of so I feel, that feels hopeless. It feels sad, lonely, hopeless.
Nothing, right? Okay, now let's ask the second question, which is you're a piece of clay, you're a soul, but you believe you have a soul. How does that feel?
My first instinctual answer is it feels open. So, which is probably leaning toward kind of hopefulness, opportunity, but just feels kind of open.
Okay. Third question. You have a soul, you're a soul being, but you choose to believe you don't have a soul. How does that feel?
Well, okay, so it has a little bit of sadness and confusion to it. It's a little bit of like, why close it off, but also, a bit of sadness to it.
Okay. You're a soul being, and you choose to believe you have a soul. How does that feel?
I mean, honestly, I'm feeling like I'm not making up the open, close, like it feels open again.
Okay. So now that you've answered those 4 questions, where's the benefit and where's the downside?
See, it sounds so simple. One feels better and one looks hopeful and one looks like opportunity and the other doesn't. Feels closed and isolated and sad and...
So in the book, The Infinity Within, so Gabe is in his 20s and he's at a coffee shop and he's expecting somebody to randomly pop up because that's what happens. And Elias is at the coffee counter. He's never met Elias. He's getting a coffee. They meet eyes, and Gabe knows he's going to have a conversation. So Elias sits down, says hello, introduces himself, and Elias, who becomes his mentor, his opening question to Gabe is, do you believe you have a soul? Kind of an interesting opening question, huh? For somebody you've never met before.
Starting big, no question.
So they talk about it a bit, and Gabe says, yeah, but I think I do, and there's all these things, but I don't know it. There's no proof. And Elias says, okay, I get that. He says, so let me ask you a question. Do you believe love exists?
What does he say? I do.
Yeah, love exists. Well, how do you know it? What makes you know love exists and you don't believe you have a soul? And what if you took the same construct or belief around love and added it to the belief of a soul? How would that feel? How does that look?
Interesting.
Kind of fun, huh?
Yeah, very.
Did I answer your question?
You did, and then some. And some of the other questions. I was piecing it into some of the other questions. Awesome. Thank you for taking us through that. I had a question earlier, and I think, I'm not sure, I'm reframing it, but I'm not sure how to reframe it. But I think I want to ask you if you believe you're an optimist, if that's the right way to say it.
How to answer that question? It kind of comes back to the 4 questions of, do you believe you have a soul, right? There's a lot of teachers, there's a lot of discussions, there's a lot of different spiritual leaders and people that talk about frequency, that talk about manifestation, that talk about abundance and how you receive it and how the universe reflects what we're feeling and how we are. So am I an optimist in the sense of the word? Am I just always thinking positive things? From a frequency standpoint, I have bad things that happen occasionally, but I don't look at them as harmful, or I try not to. I look at them as learning experiences, and how did that serve me at that time? So I don't know if that's necessarily optimism versus just shifting the way I look at how life operates and works. And that again comes from the genesis of building the construct around how the infinity within is written, is that if we're soul beings, meaning we have a soul, and that we all agree that we're in the game of life and that we're all co-creators in this game, then what that could mean is that we're actually responsible for what we co-create. And that comes down to how we're feeling, what we manifest, what we're looking to accomplish in our current soul path, in our current incarnation. There's a lot of different ways of looking at that answer.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. You've talked about a near-death experience at 15. And anybody who has had one of those knows that can be transformational. And maybe they're listening and they're thinking, oh, that's when it happened. You've talked about having out-of-body experiences before that, things that could be very common for a lot of children, but things that we often say, it was just a dream, it didn't really happen, and so on. I don't know which one you want to start with. So I don't know if you want to, if there's kind of the early memory of what you now acknowledge or at the time acknowledged was an out-of-body experience, but was maybe told it wasn't. I mean, I don't know if your call, if we need to talk about pretending it's not real, that's not necessarily what we're talking about, but just some of those experiences.
I don't mind digging as deep as you want. It takes some time, and different listeners are going to receive what I say differently, because for those folks that have been through an NDE, then my description of my NDE is going to be probably pretty real for them. For somebody that might not have gone through an NDE, it may feel like, yeah, that's BS, and there's no way that happened, right? But when you're in it, it's very real for you. So my first out of body at 6, what happened is I was sitting on my carpet in my room, and it was later in the evening. And I remember there was a toy train sitting in front of me. And all of a sudden, everything became very ethereal, very smoke-like. All the physical items became like the texture of smoke or a piece of tissue paper. I could hear voices, basically an infinite number of voices. I could see almost an infinite space. And it was like I expanded into everything. And when I reached down to pick up the toy train, even though I was able to pick it up, it felt like it had absolutely no consistency, no reality to it. Scared the crap out of me. I ran up to my parents, and they told me it wasn't real, you made it up. And I went to sleep, and the next morning as a 6-year-old, it's like, yeah, that didn't happen, right? It was just this weird stuff. Well, then at 8 years old, it happened again. And so I played with it a little bit more and listened to the voices and heard things like conversations. And if I focused in, I could focus in on sight and sound into a specific place, which in theory you shouldn't be able to do. And again, everything had the consistency of smoke. And at some point, some things happened. I got scared, ran up to my parents, and went away again. Age 12 is where it took a slightly different turn. So, as I'd mentioned, I started selling computers when I was in junior high. I started making money at a pretty young age, and back in the day, I had bought, at that time, what was something I really wanted, which was a Cal King waterbed. In today's world, they don't really exist, to my knowledge, anymore, but back then it was a big deal. And for those that don't know what a Cal King waterbed is, it's a California King, but the mattress is a giant bubble of water. And they are not light. And the construct of the frame is not light because it has to hold the bubble of water, right? So I remember sitting with my back against it. I'm on the carpet and I'm doing something, I don't know what, and I enter into this state of out-of-bodiness, and everything pretty much is the same. But I get curious, and I turn around and I take my index finger and I push on the waterbed. And it moves about 3 inches. Scared the crap out of me, ran up to my parents, and it went away. Next morning I go down and the bed has been moved 3 inches on the carpet. There's a line where it used to be, and there's a line where it is. Explain that to me. So that's my first time where something happened that quote unquote is not explainable, not real, but there was physical evidence left that was something I couldn't argue out of reality. Nobody could say it was a dream when the bed has moved and it was filled with water. Just doesn't happen.
So can I ask, did you go back to your parents and show them evidence and revisit it with them? No.
No, I just kind of went, all right. Yeah, that's a good question. I never even really thought about that, but no, I never brought it back to them or had them come down and go, look at this. So anyway, in North Dakota, because we lived out of town and it's primarily an agriculture and, ranching state, you're able to start driving at a younger age. So I got my driver's license when I was 14, was driving when I was 15. My folks had a Mach 2 Mustang that they gave me. And in the first month, I had 6 accidents. And they were very interesting. The first one, so in North Dakota, it snows, it's icy, it's a cold state. My first accident is I'm on this hill and I start sliding and I'm hitting the brakes and I slide into this motorhome parked on the side of the street. And I'm freaking out. It's my first accident. And I go and ring the doorbell and go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I hit your RV and blah, blah, blah. And they come out and they look and there's not a scratch on my car or on their bumper. And they go, yeah, why are you bothering us? There's no damage here. Go away. So each of the accidents were pretty much along those lines until the 6th one, which is an old lady in a full-size Cadillac runs a stop sign and moves the passenger door of my car to about the middle. Now, neither of us got hurt, but the car got hurt. And so my dad, for whatever reason, decided to have it fixed. So about 2 weeks to a month later, I don't remember exactly how long it took, the night I picked it up, and I was working at this place called Team Electronics at the time, which was just down the street from the dealership. I went and picked it up, and we lived out of town on this road called Old Highway 10, which is this skinny little 2-lane road that has these kind of slopes, and then there's ice and snow. And as a teenager, I'm not terribly bright, and I'm driving way faster than I should be. So I'm driving 60, 70 miles an hour. Now, the road wasn't that icy. But anyway, I'm driving fairly fast. However, that's not the problem. The problem is I have a black pickup truck that is all over the road coming straight at me. I've got a drunk driver in a full-size pickup truck coming at me. So I pull the car off the road as far as I kind of can, and the truck just nearly misses me. But now I have a new problem. The slope and the ice and the snow are sucking my car down the ravine towards the concrete pylon of a bridge. All I can tell you is I felt this incredible surge of energy, a bright flash of light. The car shifts 90 degrees. I go across the highway. It shears 6 trees off. The steering wheel goes through the driver's seat that I was sitting in. I'm hanging upside down by my legs from the steering wheel. The engine is partially pulled out, and I'm 3 feet off the ground in the car without a bruise or scratch on me. On top of that, I let myself loose and crawl out of the window and go up on the road. And where this car going 60, 70 miles an hour changes a 90-degree direction is a half-inch lump of snow. You tell me how that happened. When I'm standing there and I look at this, now it took 3 wreckers to pull that car out of those trees. Anybody that stopped wondered who died. When I looked at the snow, the epiphany I had was, I'm meant to be here for something. And that this universe is not running the way I've been told. And a lot of people that have NDEs will tell you similar things. In fact, I can't think of a single one that hasn't had a significant shift in their consciousness from an NDE. They might not talk about it. They might not go into a bunch of details, but I don't know of a single one that hasn't gone through an NDE and not had a significant shift in the way they perceive the universe around them. So with those kinds of things happening to me, yeah, the way I look at things is very different than what most people are taught to look at them.
Amazing. So thank you for sharing that. Take us forward, but on our way there, you're 19 or 20, you have a story, you have a book, you go to the point of getting a ghostwriter. It doesn't work out. How do you leave that book there where it is and move forward?
It was easy. I wasn't an author. I was not comfortable. I mean, I was comfortable making notes and I scribble. I mean, I'm used to computers, so my writing is horrific, but you can kind of read it. It's kind of like a doctor writing, right? So I have tons of handwritten notes and I wrote everything and I put everything there, but I was not confident nor comfortable enough to take that and put a book around it, nor did I even have the skills or understanding of the skills of how to put a book around that. And so for me, it was just like, okay, I get it. The main reason I wrote down the notes and took everything and hired the ghostwriter is I didn't want to lose what I had learned. I wanted what I'd learned and what I put together meticulously to be documented in a way I could always go to if I went, oh yeah, I forgot something. I didn't want it to become a memory that got lost. And as we're taught, this is something in schools they'll teach you, most people know, is there's seeing a thing, there's talking about a thing, and then there's writing a thing. And each one of those is a different set of memory that when you combine them, it becomes a lot more permanent. And so just by writing the notes and having the discussions with the ghostwriter, it allowed me to solidify my concepts, my ideas. So it served a purpose. It's just that she kept wanting to write her own story around it. It's like, no, we're going this way. No, we're going, after a few arguments of which way it was going to go, it's like, okay, you're done. And then I just put the notes because I wasn't confident or comfortable in writing a book. I put them in a filing cabinet. Now, what's interesting is that filing cabinet stayed with me. It's a little firebox. It stayed with me for 40 plus years. So I'm able to pull out those kinds of things. There's only a handful of things that are in there. I have notes for another book idea that I'll end up writing. One of the things that was really cool that I put in there is, I don't know, you've probably heard of the hard drive company called Seagate. I think it's Alan Shugart. Anyway, the very first business plan he wrote before founding and starting Seagate, he gave me a copy of and signed it. Because I've worked with some of the top industry people in the computer space since it started. So, those are the kinds of things that are in my filing cabinet.
Very interesting. Very cool.
Yeah. So I've met some of the key players. And so I met Alan. We got along really well. And he gave me, as just kind of a fun thing, an original of the business plan he used to fund Seagate.
You don't have to tell us all your secrets, but you've got that. You've got your next book. What other kinds of things are in there?
Things of that type. Things that have timeless value to me.
Okay. So you have a whole career in here. You meet a woman who is, in the story of this book, who champions it, who hears you, who learns, who is advised by the knowledge, the theory, the understanding that is in the infinity within, champions it and says you really have to put it forward. I want to ask about two areas now. So at some point, you do become an author. I want to hear how that came about, in addition to your wife who supported you in that endeavor, how you got yourself to do it. And then let's also talk about family, your wife, fatherhood, those pieces.
I've always wanted to write books. I've always had an interest in writing things in order to take my ideas and put them to words. And after a bunch of companies and learning a lot about contract law and having to write a lot of emails and do lots of communication, I got much more comfortable in the English language and how it operates and how words work and all that stuff. And I come across a group that specialized in self-publishing. And I want to say it's the Nicholson twins. And they created a company around publishing. And I signed up for their thing, and I was very impressed with them. Their very first week that they teach is about how to run your own business and how to do banking and things that I knew how to do, but that a lot of people don't. But they took it upon themselves to give people some foundational stuff, which I thought was really cool. The other thing they did in their program is they said, if you publish your first book and get it done and do an Audible and follow what we've taught you, I think at the time, and maybe they still do it, they will give you back $500 out of what you've paid them, which is pretty cool if you think about it. I mean, how many mentors say, look, if you follow what I'm teaching you and actually do it, I'm going to give you some of your money back. So nothing but positive things to say about those two guys. They are twins, and they are still doing it to my knowledge. I'm pretty sure they have a thing called publishing.com. Anyway, so I saw that and I said, you know what? This is an opportunity to go do what I want to do. And so I followed their program, and I already had a spreadsheet because during my technology background and doing all these companies, the thing keeping me grounded was my hobby, which was building houses. So my hobby was taking my brain and using hammers. My business was taking my brain and doing these, software and what you would consider technological magic, right? Because that's really all software is you do this incantation, meaning you write this code, and if you do it wrong, it doesn't work. And if you do it right, it goes and does stuff, right? It's about the closest thing we have in the material world to magic that we can come up with. And so that was really cool. But the problem with computers and technology, in one of my business partners, my VP of sales, and I used to talk about this in one of the companies, is there's always going to be bugs. There's always going to be things to fix. Whereas when you build a house or you build a piece of furniture, you do it once and it pretty much doesn't change. So they're two different skills. One kept me very grounded and one allowed me to do creative things. Well, I came up with a spreadsheet of like 26 weeks of the things that I knew I had to finish and sign off, like a policies and procedures document on building a house, right? And I used it. And I said, well, shoot. And, everybody I talked to said, yeah, this is not a good niche. You're not going to make a lot of sales. And I said, you know what? Here, I have my spreadsheet. I'm comfortable writing about this. I think I'm going to do that first. And so 4 or 5 years ago now, I wrote the first book, which is book 1 of How to Build Your Dream Home, which is kind of like a 20,000 foot view of the whole 26-week process. So it's an overview document. And then it came to me, it's like, oh, this is cool. I can make this into a 10-book series. And what I do is I take a chapter. So like the first chapter is an introduction, but the second chapter in book 1 is all the things you need to do before you break ground, like figuring out where you want to live and buying a piece of land and getting your bank financing and putting a porta potty on the land and putting a power pole in, right? That chapter is 3,000 words, 3,500 words. That's not a lot of words to describe that process. So book 2 is a 40,000 word version of that chapter. So book 2 is all about what you need to do before you break ground. Well, book 3 is all about foundations, which is the next chapter. And then each chapter is a book. And so out of the 10 books, 5 have been published. 6 I've got written and done, except for all of the illustrations. I'm working on illustration. So 6 will get published relatively soon. But illustrations are a pain in the butt. If you do them right, they take time because they actually have to mean something, right? They actually have to fit what's going on. But that got me very comfortable in my own skin. And book 1, I was very fortunate, sold like 2,200 books a week for almost 2 months. And so having that kind of feedback was really empowering and made me more comfortable. And then, like you'd mentioned at the very beginning, I wrote the finance book for young adults. And the reason I wrote that is I do mentoring still for people that want to hire me to kind of help them with their startup business or help them get their business back on track. But what I found is almost all of them ask very similar questions, which are fundamental questions that we're not taught in school about what is money really? And how do the ultra-rich treat money, and how do they look at money, which is very different than what the normal person is taught. And so by looking at money as a tool and not a necessity, it shifts how we look at it, how we use it, and what we do with it. And so I wrote the finance book for young adults as if I was 17 or 18 and wanted a book to help me. Because there's things that I have in the book that, God, I wish I'd been taught when I was 17 or 18, because it would have changed things even more to the fun. I mean, there's this concept of IUL insurance. I'm not going to dive into it deep, but basically IUL insurance, nobody's taught about. And yet it is flipping amazing. And if the younger you are, the sooner you take advantage of it, the more it changes your life. And so there's concepts. I mean, in chapter 10 in the finance book for young adults, the whole chapter is dedicated to how does your morning look? As simple as the first part of the chapter is why taking a cold shower is both mentally empowering as well as bodily empowering. Like, how does it help you philosophically, but also kind of the whole body, your immune system, your circulation, your organs. Cold showers are very therapeutic, but they're also very scary. And when I say scary, you're standing in front, I don't know if you've done this, but when I'm standing in front of that cold shower looking at that cold water, it's like, I don't want to get in this. I don't want to do this. I know the first 10 seconds are going to be incredibly uncomfortable. And I was talking to this guy's got, I don't know, 5 million followers on YouTube, and we were talking and having a chat, and he says, I do cold showers, but where it helps me the most is mentally. And I said, tell me about it. He says, well, here's the deal. When I force myself to get into that cold shower and get it, it gears me up for the rest of the day that I know I can do anything that gets in my way mentally. So you know what? You're right. Because it's hard. The whole thing, it has to do with breathing exercises, positive affirmation. It's a structure in the first hour of the morning, how it sets up your whole day for success. I've had people comment in their reviews, well, how does that have anything to do with finances? And it's like, maybe you don't understand. It has everything to do with finances. Because your mental state and how you start the day affects everything. But for the folks that write these reviews and say, well, this is stupid. Why did he write this chapter on how to start my day in a finance book? It's like, they're not there yet. Because I can't emphasize enough how the morning starts everything. Every day is a brand new day, and how we enter it is incredible. Anyway.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. That's the authorship journey. We don't have a lot of time left together, but I want to go through a few questions and also just a chance to fill in some blanks. So we've kind of floated over a lot of key aspects of your career. I want to just give you a chance if you want to share some highlights during your career.
What drives me and what I really enjoy is creating things that haven't been done before. So every single company I've started came from a problem or thing that didn't exist that I felt would really serve or help people get somewhere better, faster, easier, more comfortable, solve a problem that wasn't being solved. And then how to do it and the creation part really drives me. I really enjoy the curiosity and creation part of each company. So I'd say that's probably the highlights, are starting them and coming up with the idea and then working on the solutions and being curious about how to make it better, faster, whatever it is. The second part is the team and building the team and working with the people, right? Because every single person that gets added to a company adds another flavor, another concept, another set of ideas, another set of hopes and concerns and things. And so that makes a company that dynamic presence, and it makes it much more than a mechanical thing. It makes it alive.
Very interesting. Good. If I asked you about some challenges you faced?
oh boy, I'll just dive into one. And the reason I'm going to dive into it is because of the lesson from it. So I had a company called Paradox, which at one point in time did relational databases. And then at a later point in time, we were one of the 3 companies in the world starting, creating, and making electronic mail work. And Ray Norda, who was the CEO of a company called Novell, which at the time was the largest micro networking company. Microsoft didn't have Windows 3.1 wasn't released yet and wasn't a networking piece of software. Novell owned the marketplace. Ray Norda's personal family fund invested in things we were doing, as well as another company called OAZ, which did NetFax, which was a product of my company's, which was a centralized faxing system that worked from email from your desk. This was way ahead of its time. We're talking in 89 and 90s. And we did some phenomenal stuff, and we were getting phenomenal reviews, but we just couldn't get the sales numbers. And so at one point, I couldn't pay my people. And I said, guys, you're going to have to put your resumes out. You're going to have to go look for a job because I can't pay you. Some of them wanted to stay. And I said, no. Let me get this out of this space and then I'll call you. So some of them I actually didn't have to force, but I had to say, you need to go. And so for about 3 months, I was the janitor. I was the box shipper. I was the call taker. I was the receptionist. I was the customer relations. I was customer support. I was everything. And at the time, I'd make my cup of coffee in the morning. I'd sit down. I'd start one day. I had a sequence of things I did each day. And it felt very lonely and kind of like things weren't going to work. Now, keep in mind that by this time I had this construct in place of how things really work, at least in my way of thinking. But when you're in the middle of something like that, it feels pretty dark. It feels pretty harsh. And then one morning, I get a phone call. And it's from a gentleman named John Belden. I believe he was a CEO of Mattel. He had a pretty strong CEO background. His chairman of the board was Nolan Bushnell, who was the founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese. Atari, just so if everybody remembers, is who Steve Jobs worked for before he created Apple. So these are all interconnected people. And John wanted to buy my company. Now, keep in mind, my company at that point was the technology and me. So we started talking, and we had a conversation for a couple weeks, and we put a deal together. And by that time, of course, we got to know each other pretty well, and I shared with him how things were going. He didn't take advantage of it. He didn't try to negotiate the deal down. And they acquired the company. And a year later, we took that company public together. So the lesson from that is, even in your darkest space, you're one phone call or one conversation away from the entire world and how you're looking at it changing. And just remembering that how you look at the universe and how you treat it and what your vibration is at clearly sets what's going to happen next. So an example of that would be, and this is a verbal example of how this manifested in a real way. After John acquired my company and we were talking, he asked me a question. He says, do you know one of the main reasons I bought your company? I said, well, I assume it was the technology and the stuff we'd done. He says, well, that was part of it. He says, one of the main reasons I acquired your company was the way you treated my receptionist. I said, what do you mean? Every time you called, you were very polite to them and you were very nice to them. You never talked down to them. I said, well, yeah, why would I? He says, you have no idea how many CEOs of companies are very rude to the receptionist. John intentionally taught his receptionists to pay attention to this and communicate to him. And that was one of his decision factors in how he worked with people, is how he treated line people. The bottom line out of that was that he taught me a valuable lesson I wasn't even aware of, which is how we look at life and how we treat life and how we treat people around us really does matter. And in this case, it was a very visceral way of learning this, because fortunately, I don't go down the street of treating people differently. And that was one of his prime decision-making reasons for acquiring my company. Now, if I'd been in a negative space and treated everybody horrible, that phone call could have gone very different.
Yeah, very interesting. Very good example. Okay. So how did fatherhood change your perspective on any aspect, any of the pieces we've talked about?
Fatherhood, parenthood is huge, right? I mean, you have beings now that count on you. And so one of the very first lessons, so I've always been really good with kids. I've always loved kids. I've always gotten along with them really well. Kids and animals, I've always protected and been very protective of. And I've always had, remember, I've mentioned people come to me randomly in restaurants. Well, kids can be in restaurants and be staring at me. At one point, my mom was teaching Sunday school, and as a young kid, I was helping teach Sunday school, and there's some really cool stories out of that as well. But the bottom line is I've always done well. But when you have your own, one of the first things that became a realization for me is the concept of being selfish has to go away. You can't be selfish with your time, and you can't just say, well, I'm not feeling good, so I'm going to disconnect from reality. Or I'm going to hide in a closet or under my blankets because I just don't feel good. Those kinds of things really aren't available anymore. You have to say, okay, yeah, I'm having a bad day. However, my boys are counting on me to go play ball with them, to go do this with them, to answer questions and be honest with them. Now, that doesn't mean I hide my emotions from them. If I'm feeling bad, I can say, yeah, I'm just having a bad day today, but let's go do something fun together, right? So the concept of selfishness, pretty much whether we want it to or not, ends up disappearing, or not nice things can happen. So I would say that's probably the biggest lesson I learned from it. But it's huge because I look at them every day with pride, with, how smart they are and the problems they solve, and at the age they're solving them. Shoot, a couple days ago, we had a network problem. Our routers were doing this weird hiccup thing. And so our IT guy comes into the house and he's working and looking at it, and he's sitting down at one of the boys' computers, and the other two are at school, and my oldest is homeschooling, and he's 10 years old. And I had to go do something, and I come back, he says, I'm totally impressed with your son. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, he just was talking to me about frames per second and what's happening on the pauses, how the internet is doing these things, and what's going on with the router in detail. I mean, I've had some discussions about technology with Jacob about these things, but he's done his own research and had his own ideas of what was going on, and was able to articulate in a way that this is his life, was really impressed about. So that's really cool. Hopefully teaching him the things I've learned and how money operates and looks, and just different ways of looking at life, has been a lot of fun.
Well, my last question for today, it's not a leading question. We've covered a lot of ground. How do you define success?
Two answers. There's the material world answer, which is what we've discussed when I was 17 and 18, which is we work hard, we make a lot of money, we have the things we want to buy and do, and that's what we're told is success. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, if you take a look at the infinity within and the construct that I describe, and I'm going to take a little side channel on this, is we've talked briefly, just mentioned that I consider this the game of Earth, and that we're in this game, and that we're souls, and that we're co-creators. I'm going to cut into a couple key pieces because otherwise it would take too long. So the first question is, great, what's a game? Well, a game has three components. You have pieces, you have turns, and you have rules. So if we're in this thing called the game of Earth, then that presupposes these three things exist. Well, the pieces are relatively simple. That's us. And we're, call it an avatar or a piece of us or all of us or whatever are in this game. I've described turns to be lifetimes, which deals with the ideas of resurrection and being in each life and then coming back. And then we get to the rules. And I'm going to briefly describe the rules because it will get to answering your question. I'm not going to describe all 8 rules, which are in the book. I'm just going to go through the first 4. When I started looking at a soul and describing it under, and I'm going to use the Bible as the context because it's the most read book on the planet, right? In the Bible, and all the theologies we discussed at the beginning, the semantics, again, are different, but the meanings all seem to have a very common thread in. And that is, in the Bible, it says pretty darn clearly that we are the children of God. It also says pretty clearly where Jesus tells his disciples that you will do everything I have done and much more. And that we can make heaven on earth or hell on earth. And there's a number of different things that relate to co-creation and soul beings. And it's not in 1 or 2 chapters and verses. It's pretty much through the whole darn thing. And if you go to the Old Testament, in a much bigger way. From the old to the new, a lot of things got modified. So if we're these beings that exist outside of space and time, I could only come up with 3 things that this being would do. You can create stuff, meaning planets and universes and stuff. You can destroy stuff. And you can play games. Well, the first 2 are pretty easy to discuss, right? Creating and destroying things. Anything. That's pretty easy. Playing games, we've just described what makes a game. 3 things. Well then, okay, so we're the soul, we play games if we agree on this construct. What would be interesting about the planet Earth game, which exists in a 4th dimension? Well, first off, we have to ask, what does 4th dimension really mean? Well, 4th dimensional system or construct, the primary motivator is time. If you go to 3 dimensions below, time doesn't exist. 5 and above, time is there, but it's not the primary motivator. So the game of planet Earth, being in a 4th dimensional construct, the unique or primary motivator is the existence of time. Great. What would be interesting, fascinating, or fun for a soul in a 4th dimensional construct? I could only come up with one thing. Experience emotion. Because you can only do that when time exists. Okay, so what do the rules look like? If we want to experience emotion in this 4th dimensional construct game called Earth, rule 1 is that we agree to put our abilities as a god away. We're not going to drag them in with us. Now, why is that? Well, if you and I sit down to play Monopoly and I grab all the money and all the properties, you're not going to want to play anymore with me because it's just not that much fun, right? So the rule 1 is we agree to put all of our godlike abilities, we leave them behind. That kind of works. Except that when my favorite dog runs across the street and gets run over and I still have my abilities, I just draw on them and go, no, that didn't happen. And so even though I experience emotion, I won't really experience it to the fullest extent because I can change anything I don't like. In comes rule 2. I agree to forget that I have them. Okay, that works to solve that problem, but it creates a whole another problem. It's called an infinite trap loop. Because just with those 2 rules, I've now stuck a piece of myself in the game and I've agreed to forget that I'm a god. Well, that's not going to work. Assuming we're relatively smart, we're not going to do something like that. So we're going to have the 3rd rule, which is we're going to have turns. And when we're at the pearly gates looking in to start the game and play the game, we're going to say, okay, in a rough sense, I'm going to have these turns and I want to accomplish certain things in each turn to kind of make the game interesting and fun. And when I've done all the things that I've kind of set aside to do, whatever turns it takes, I'm done and I'm going to leave the game. Now comes the fun nuances. And that is, I'm in a turn, but I've forgotten what I am because I've done that intentionally to make the game more challenging. And then we discuss briefly the idea of archons and illusion and doubt and fear to make the game more interesting. Because I'll take another side channel. How often do you play tic-tac-toe?
Not that often these days. Well, part of the answer is when I do play it, it's usually somebody younger who wants to play it with me. The reason I don't play it is because the challenge isn't there for me anymore.
It's very boring, right? Once you figure out where the X's and O's go, you're done. Well, okay, we're these omnipotent beings. We're not going to pick tic-tac-toe to go play. We're going to pick Go. Right? So now think of planet Earth in this 4th dimensional construct with the first 3 rules being Go. So in the idea of turns, we've agreed that we're going to accomplish certain things, or we get to do the turn over and over and over until such time as we accomplish what it is that we've set aside for ourselves, in which case we get to move on, and eventually leave. Now to answer your question, what is the question of success, right? I would say that those agreements that we made before we came in, the soul path that each turn represents, is that as we listen to the signposts and figure out what it is that we were supposed to accomplish in that turn, and we get there and we learn and do whatever it is that we wanted to learn and do, that ultimately each turn's success is based on our ability to remember the pieces and parts of what we are and go do the things that we set aside for ourselves to do and to be in frequency or resolution with our soul's path. And so making a bunch of money and having freedom to do this might be part of that path. Part of that path might be living in the mountains under a tree somewhere. It really depends on each person's path and what it is they set aside for themselves. So is there an easy answer to what is success? I'd say it is, but it's very based on what you've already agreed to kind of want to do.
Wow.
That's the medium version.
That's something I think everybody needs to sit with. I have follow-up questions, but we already said this was the last one, and that is a good place to pause. Before I thank you, I've lit all the questions. We've covered a lot of ground. Was there anything that you really wanted to share that
No, we've done a lot. I really appreciate the questions. The only thing is, for those folks that are interested in what I'm doing, I've been very blessed. If you look up my name spelled like it is there, Kris Land, and or look up The Infinity Within on Google, I take up the first 3 pages. The book is being sold on Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble. Of all places, you can go to Walmart and get it. It's being sold in bookstores in Norway, Barcelona, Australia, all over the world. So I've been very blessed. Please go get it. Please have a look at it. Think of it this way. It was funny. I was talking to some other folks and they said, "Oh my goodness, you wrote this 40 years ago and it's still relevant?" And I said, it's actually, I would argue, more relevant today than it was 40 years ago because of all the things that are going on around us right now, politically, technologically, the things that are coming up in the news of some pretty horrible things. It's the old Chinese saying, may you live in interesting times. Well, we're definitely in some interesting times right now. A lot of it is making a lot of us feel very singled out, very not connected, very fearful. And the book is really designed to give some space and freedom to understanding that fear is a signpost of listening and just trying to get a feel for what's going on and how we can look at it in an open way and feel more comfortable, at least within our own skin.
Well, I have no doubt that the conversation today has not only given people some tools already, but has intrigued them to explore further. We will also have some links where you can get more information on Kris on the Infinity Within. And again, Kris, I want to thank you for all of your time, for all of your openness, for sharing wisdom, for sharing experiences, things that either people have thought a lot about or maybe people have never experienced, and they are learning through this conversation today. It has been quite a powerful conversation.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for the awesome questions and asking them.
So for everybody else listening, this has been another episode of the AudioLife Memoirs. I've been your host again today, Carrie Purcell, learning about the enlightening story of Kris Land, the author of Infinity Within. And if you like what you heard today, please don't forget to rate the show. It helps others find us, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another incredible story for you.